Jody.
I'm
Thank
impressed.
you.
I'm impressed.
We're never doing a full bio on me ever again. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm actually really honored to be invited. Originally, my plan was to sort of split the time 50-50, but I think there's an opportunity for, I should say, there's more confusion around self-employment. So I really want to spend some more time there. And Jody, I'll say that um, as questions come in, just throw them at me because I think it's
Okay,
easier to take them as the conversation comes up. I mean, if you see a lot of them, maybe just cluster them together and
sure.
try to
Hmm.
make a mashup question. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
okay.
All right.
No
I'll
problem.
say off the top that my contact information is on the slides. If you have any questions because I haven't been clear, you're welcome to reach out to me directly. All right, so hopping in, I got my timer running and I want to make sure I stay on track. So we'll start with ageism. What is it? And it's basically bias or discrimination based on age. Interestingly enough, it goes both ways. So, for example, a younger person might get dismissed as, you don't have enough experience to know about this. But it disproportionately affects older workers because there are a whole lot of reasons why, as we'll talk about. So some of them literally might be you're overqualified, wink, wink, you're too old. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an age thing, but there's a chance it might be related to age. Implicitly would be things like they say, there are all these code words like energy, digital native. You'll see these terms on an upcoming slide that suggest you might not be of that group or have that quality because of your age. And then some of them, which we're going to look at, are just barriers in things like AI technology that are being used more and more today that screen out candidates. Back in the day, we would send in resumes. Well, hell, back in the day, we would fill out job applications. I remember those with a pencil on paper. It's not really like that often anymore. And so you would send it in, and then an actual human would look at your resume and start to make some assessments and some decisions and things like that. But today, a lot of this is driven by technology, which on the one hand is great. It moves things along. Certain types of bias are eliminated. On the other hand, the algorithms embedded in software and programs like AI screening might actually create a new set of problems, some of the problems we're talking about today. So, what are some of the stereotypes? And as you read through this list, I don't know how many of these feel like something maybe you've experienced. The thing about bias, uh, it's so often so subtle that you might not even realize it's happening. And then you read a description like this and you think, oh, no, that happened to me. Or I realize after the fact that they did that, whatever the did is. And so some of this is maybe you haven't been able to put a name on it, but you felt it. And some of this is, no, this explicitly happened to you. And this is somewhat validating to know that it isn't your imagination. So, for example, the stereotype is that if you're older, you're inflexible or you're not willing to change, maybe to adopt new technologies. If you're older, maybe you're just less tech savvy and you just can't keep up as technology is changing. Because of all your years of experience, you are assumed to be overqualified. And there are a lot of markers that signal our age. For example, when I'm doing presentations, a lot of my clients are accounting firms. And I graduated from college in, I'm going to say 89. I believe that's when it was. So it's been a minute. And on the one hand, especially when I was younger, I would verbally say things so people would know I was older so that they would give me credit and not see me as too young to really know. And on the flip side, I wanted to put in today markers around my age to know that I'm experienced enough. So it's something that you can do, but it can, backfire, that kind of thing. So, but overqualified, underqualified, are you energetic enough? you know what, you're so close to retirement, they're thinking they're not going to stay here long. That's a big problem if that's what's happening in the background. So, what are some of the things you can look for? Well, the first thing many of us are doing is we're looking at the job title. Titles, I didn't actually put this in here, but job titling can be challenging because a CEO in one organization can, in terms of level, demand, pressure, expectation, etc., isn't it apples to apples comparison if it's a CEO in another organization? An administrative role in one organization, say it's an administrative assistant, might feel more like the old day description of, say, a secretary or an administrative intern. But today, that might be an executive type assistant that's expected to make certain types of decisions on behalf of the people that they support. So we have to be careful about terminology and job titles. I did not put this down here. But some of these you might see, like, I'm looking for a rock star. It seems innocent enough, but what they're signaling here potentially is we're looking for somebody who's younger. Um, Physical ability, too, is a very tricky one. It used to be seen in a lot of job applications. For example, I can't tell you how many job applications said something like, you have to be able to stand for 15 minutes and lift 10 pounds. And I'm thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And that's clearly discriminatory towards somebody, say, who has a physical disability that can't stand. And in theory, they'll look past that. But could that be a problem if you're applying in an environment where the technology and the AI tools being used just screen you out completely? So these are some things to look for. We should see it less and less, but that's something to be mindful of. So how do you find this language, this ageist language? Ageist is the language to discourage older applicants because sometimes I know about, for me, I mean, I'm self-employed, but that doesn't mean I'm not looking. I'm always open to opportunities, and I get these emails from LinkedIn, which is, by the way, I'll explain that later, but I get these emails from LinkedIn about you might be a good fit for that role. Have you seen this opportunity? And I will tell you that I look at some of the language and I myself might think, am I too old for that job or am I too experienced for that job? Would I fit in there because the culture feels a little bit more modern and I'm used to working in a more traditional environment, and some of that's my industry. I mean, public accounting, pretty conservative. So culture fit is code often for you have to look like us, feel like us, do like us, whatever that means. And then focusing on potential means room to grow. And if you're older, you don't have room to grow. So these are some terms, these are just some examples to look for. When you're looking at job applications, some of these things, when they ask for dates. Now, I was actually applying for a job recently, and this is a while ago, like I think it was a couple months ago, but it asked me for a start date for a job. Like when I had no idea like the actual month, day, and year. And I will tell you, I was anxious about putting in the day because like I don't know, did I start on the 12th? I mean, I don't know. Why don't you just ask for month and year? But so the older the dates are, the more difficult that can feel. And there's some real anxiety about putting in an incorrect answer on a job application in case some technicality later says you lied or misrepresented yourself. So this is a real concern. So required dates or drop down menus, and the one you're looking for isn't there. So you have 15 years experience, but it stops at 10. So what do? Say 10? Especially if there's no field where you can put in other. Uh, Putting in mandatory years of graduation. I know on my resume, my years of graduation are gone. So I've taken that off because it doesn't matter when I graduated. What matters is I have the degree. What if I got the degree right out of college? What if I got the degree 3 years ago? Um, and the timing differences between some of those educational successes and achievements might signal something different. So, I mean, thinking about all the signaling, and I don't know about you, but I'm already getting exhausted. So there's just a lot to think about. I really don't want to spark fear or create anxiety, but this is around awareness, because if this has happened to you, maybe this is validating. But if you haven't really thought about this before, this is an opportunity. And what I invite you to do is just pay a little bit more attention, look for these cues and clues. It does not mean to not apply. It does not mean to not follow up and reach out about the opportunity. It's just information to know, right? The more educated we are, the better our opportunities to overcome challenges. So, what are some things you can do? Well, when you're looking at your resume, what are some ways that you can address it? So, career gaps, if you so one of the things, for example, and this actually might be on a later slide, is you want to highlight your skills that are relevant to the job. So if you had a job 4 years ago, and then you had a job 12 years ago, and in between those two jobs, the job wasn't really relevant to what you're looking at. So there's this gap, and it seems obvious because you only include the two relevant jobs. That might signal something that's seen as negative. Maybe it's because you don't have enough experience versus you have too much experience. So there are a lot of different things to think about. I actually have some tips on another page, so let me hold off going further there. AI screening, applicant tracking systems. There are a number of different tools that are being used today. Some organizations use multiple tools. So for example, some organizations might use AI just to scan a resume, just to see if the person applying has the skills and the experiences that are required. So when you're looking at a job description and you see required, what software may do, depending on how they're using it, is if you don't have all or most explicitly on your resume in a way that the technology can detect, your resume just doesn't even make it any further than that. So there are some things like that that software can do. So we need to be mindful of this. So how do we think about that? So outdated action verbs and language. You see how down here on the bottom, we want to be looking at what is the language that is being used today, because I'm responsible for X versus I delivered this or that impact or drove this result or achieved this ... milestone. How do you see someone else describing that on their resume? Now, the way you're going to find out about that is conversation, networking. Many of you, if you're in these programs, might want to chit chat with each other to see if somebody else is doing something and is it working for them. You're in the job interview. Some of the trick questions, I don't even want to say trick questions, because many of these questions are the kind of questions that might be on a list. They might have 30 questions in their back pocket. The challenge is which questions naturally come up when they're interviewing older candidates. So, third from the bottom, how long have you been working? Why are you asking me that? Just right there on my resume. Or maybe it's not because you took the dates off. Does it matter if I've been working since I graduated from college? Or what if I decided to take a sabbatical? What if I decided to take time off to be a stay-at-home parent? And by the way, that's going to be viewed differently if you're a female than if you're a male. So there are so many different challenges in here when it comes to answering simply a question like that. This isn't don't answer the question. This is have an answer ready so that you're not caught by surprise. If we know these are some of the types of questions that are being asked, we want to make sure we're prepared to answer them. What are you looking for in a job at this stage in your life or this stage in your career? Have an answer ready, because what this could be code for is, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but is it what we need? So these are some things to think about. Working around that bias, using your networks, using LinkedIn, tapping into where either alumni networks, professional organizations, it could even be church and community groups where you can talk with people so that you can go directly to the person hiring. For example, on LinkedIn, there's a job opportunity and it says 3 alumni work here and 2 of your first connections work here. So there's a little link. If you click on it, you'll go to the list of alumni and your people in your LinkedIn network. If the person in your LinkedIn network is somebody you connected with, but you've never really chatted with them or reached out to them, no shame in this game. Reach out to them and say, hey, I know we haven't had a lot of contact, but I'd love to learn more about such and such a role. Would you be interested? Most people want to help. The worst they can say is no. So you ask and let them say no rather than not asking. And then when you get these referrals, what can happen is, yes, you'll apply, you'll go through the systems, but what your contact can do is say, hey, my colleague Jody is applying for this job, keep an eye out for her resume, or even can hand it to them directly, even though they're going to get it in the system. So there's some ways we can get around that bias. Focusing on skills and achievements, I talked about that. Thinking about the work history that you put on your resume, focus on relevant. If you organize your resume in terms of achievements and skills rather than the chronology of your work, that can help work around this perception around age because you've now dated yourself through the chronology method. Feature, highlight skills, certifications, training that especially might be relevant to the role. Questions, I actually answered this. So you're going to get a copy of my slides. I would encourage you to, read through the slides a little bit more because I have a lot more information that I'm going through because I want to make sure I get to the self-employment pieces. But
Jenna, we have some questions. Can you take them or?
Absolutely.
Okay. Got a lot of questions. Okay. I have one that's I think for your small when you're talking about self-employment. So we'll come back to that one when you get to that. How much does near retirement count in the age when people do not stay in jobs long? Example, I have a minimum of 6 years to I have a minimum 6 years to retire. That seems like an average stay.
Say that again. I don't understand.
I think she's how much does near retirement count in the age? I don't know if she's asking when they're asking how long do you expect to stay in the job? I don't even know if you can even ask that question, but we'll come back to that one because it's a little I'm not unclear. And
Well,
if
real quick to something you said, I don't know if you can ask that question. Well, there are a lot of things people shouldn't do, and they do. So you don't want to be surprised by that. Sorry, I'll just throw that out there. Go ahead.
Someone said, what about applications that specifically ask how old you are? That used to be illegal.
Yeah, not supposed to do that anymore. So if it's a mandatory field, you have a problem. And actually, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm happy to look it up if you remind me.
Would it vary on state to state, or is that?
So that is one of the challenges. We do live in a multi-state area, so people attending today's program could be in Maryland, DC, Virginia, and maybe some other nearby states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, etc. There are federal laws, and then there are state laws, and they do vary.
Yeah.
So that one I'm not sure of. I'm not an HR expert, so there are some of these details I wouldn't know.
I my feeling is, well, if it's not like, like sometimes, like if you're an air traffic controller, you can't be over a certain age. But if it's not a job that is related to your age, like that's not part of the job, I would leave it blank.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be asked. There are some federal laws that are specifically designed to protect older workers that you cannot discriminate based on age. I can't remember the exact name of the law, but it came out in the same time period as the Civil Rights Act, the ADA, and the Pregnancy Act. And I think there's another one specifically related to age. I don't remember that.
What can you do about required college graduation dates? That was on an application form for one of the employers that said actually featured here that there was a required college graduation date.
So that's the challenge. It's not that you can't fill it out. It's just knowing that that date is there can create a bit of a challenge because if it's required information, you have to put it in. More and more organizations are not putting that in there depending on the software that they're using. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, on LinkedIn, if you see a position, I don't know if any of you have noticed it, but some of them have a button called apply, Easy Apply or Apply Now. And if you click on it, your information just gets transmitted or sent over to the organization. So you're not actually filling out a job application. And so you don't have to deal with some of those questions because they're pulling your information from what you've already put into LinkedIn. Sidebar, make sure your LinkedIn is up to date. So there's nothing I can tell you about how to not fill in required information. What our discussion was really about paying attention to and noticing that, because that might have something to do with what's coming after the fact. You just want to be prepared.
Okay. And we have lots of questions about, let's see, about gaps in years of employment. How do you handle that on your resume? And that is definitely,
Yeah.
mhm.
I know for my resume, and even when you were listing, reading my bio, there, I feel like my career is a bit of like ping pong. So in theory, they are related, but you kind of have to dig a little deeper to understand how. And so the old school thinking is most recent job, list what you did. Next most recent job, list what you did, and you just sort of go back in time. But if you look at a job description and it says it wants to have these 4 skills, then you can rearrange your resume so that you can talk about demonstrating this skill, and you don't necessarily have to put the job sequence with a reference to that skill in each of the sequences. So there are a lot of ways you can go online. There are people who can help you with your writing your resume. There are people out there who can help you with updating your LinkedIn profile to match and line up with that resume. You want to have a master resume, and then you're going to adapt it using keywords and some other things for each different job. And that is exhausting. So, but it's one of the things that can help you. Let me jump to, oh, there's only this last slide. Um, yeah, and I'm sitting here looking at the time, like there's so much information, um, to and
Go
so
ahead.
many things here that are, they're very real challenges and they're very real concerns. And the first step is awareness. One of the
Mhm.
best ways to overcome some of these challenges is to basically work your network, because we all know that what you see on paper never really translates well to what they're going to get and learn and understand when they talk to you. I mean, after all, if we could all do a 5,000, word essay, then they could really come to understand who we are. So the thing about applications and resumes is to get past, as far as you can, past those automated filters at the front end of the process so that humans can actually see your resume and get you in for an interview. And then handling that interview is really about preparation on your part.
Okay. Um,
Yeah, a
we've
lot of
got,
questions here.
yes, we have, I mean, okay.
And it looks like some people are answering some of the questions, so thank you all
Yeah.
for that. I can't keep up with the chat myself.
Yeah, someone's asked thoughts about sharing your date of birth on your resume. You don't need to. I wouldn't.
I wouldn't do that
Okay.
at all.
Yeah, you don't even need to put what years you graduated from college. You can put, if you graduated from college, you can put that you did graduate with what kind of degree, but you could start taking
Yeah, you
those
can take
dates
those
out.
things off. One
Yeah.
of the things that I just thought of, Jody, is I know on
Mm-hmm.
my resume, I have a couple of like either awards or something that I won, and
Mm-hmm.
it has the year. So I've actually thought about taking those off.
Mm-hmm.
One, I'm like, who cares? And two, I don't want to date myself as much as possible.
Right, exactly. Here's someone that I applied for a healthcare position and received an email stating that my salary requirement exceeded the specified range for the role. This is interesting. I double checked my figures and confirmed that my salary expectation was indeed within the range. This was a new way of submitting my application, and while it's difficult to prove, I suspect that age discrimination played a role in their response. That's very, what do you think,
I didn't
Gina?
completely hear all of that actually.
Okay,
So are
this
they
person,
saying they applied and they the system suggested that they were asking for more money than was in the job, but in
Yeah,
fact, that was not the case.
yeah, they said that when they applied for position, and then they received an email stating that their salary requirement exceeded the specified range for that role, and the person then double checked the his or her figures and confirmed that the salary expectation was indeed within the range.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd have to understand a little bit more of the logistics because with the technology, there's so many places that there are these hidden traps that we might not understand about what's being pulled from where. So that's actually not a question I can necessarily answer absent the
right.
specifics of that situation.
Yeah. I just that it basically they put their salary range, which was within the range that the salary was advertising, and then when they got a letter saying that their salary requirements was well exceeded the salary range.
The
That to me.
only thing that's coming to mind for me, and
Mm-hmm,
many of you have noticed, there are states now that require salary transparency. And so they will tell
mm-hmm,
you the range in specific locations. Often it's
mm-hmm.
California, Washington, D.C., New York. I see those the most often. And so I don't know, this is just me guessing, but could it be that the salary range that was put in um, didn't line up with whatever jurisdiction they synced you up into. And that might have been AI. I'm not sure. And I wish
Yeah,
we had time to answer
yeah,
all
yeah.
the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's the first thing that came to mind for me.
Okay.
And
Someone
if
said.
I could just interject here for a second.
Mhm.
Today, Gina gave us a really good, Janak gave us a really good overview of recognizing that ageism when you're in that interview. Because sometimes we walk out of one and go, did that really, was that really, or am I
Mhm.
feeling it myself? And
Mhm.
so with her tips, she's giving us some things to be looking for and sort of let us know we're not crazy or let us know, oh, maybe we are. But it's been a little good interview or overview, and it was important because this is something we talked about with the self-employment of even recognizing ageism during self-employment when you're getting going and stuff. And Jana is going to talk at great length about that. So one of the things that I want just to let everybody know is I'm in the process of trying to pin down one of the HR ageism experts to give a complete 45-minute answer everybody's questions that are so detailed that would not be fair to ask Jana those questions. Um, and she will, and we'll get that to you. And when that's all lined up, I'll send everybody a blast to let them know which workshop it's going to happen for in 2025. But I think you've given us just a wonderful interview of what to be looking for so that we know that, yeah, it really was ageism. And so,
Yeah.
how do I, what can you do with that? And I
Mhm.
think you've given us some practical tips. So I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to just let
Right.
everybody know that today. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Anne. And I think what's particularly important is that it may or may not have happened. But one, it's getting this on your radar. Two, confirming that if you have a sense of something, if you're feeling it, then it's probably something there. So explore that. But that doesn't mean don't follow up. It doesn't mean step away from that organization because some of that could just be policies, practices, and systems. They have not updated themselves and maybe not even realizing that these things are in play. But that depends. On smaller organizations, there's a higher chance of that. I do want to share on this last slide, by the way.
Go ahead.
This isn't in the slides. I just pulled this up and grabbed a screenshot before we started because LinkedIn Premium, if you don't have it, and I want to say it's something like $300 a year. So I can understand it's a lot of money. But the things that I circled here are really important because on LinkedIn, you have first degree connections, second degree connections, who are the people connected with the people you're connected with first. Lord help me. That's like a first cousin and a second cousin and a third cousin. Think of it like that. And there are limitations to you being able to send a message to somebody who isn't one of your connections. LinkedIn Premium allows you to do that. You see here in the upper right, in mail. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in mail, and that allows you to send messages. Down here on the bottom left, see who's viewed your profile. That's really helpful because not only will it tell you who's viewed your profile, but it will tell you how they found you. I have LinkedIn Premium and I see that often, and I actually look at it on a regular basis, especially if I'm a self-employed person. If I had an opportunity to talk to somebody in an organization about a possible job or some possible work, I always find it curious then if I go back to my LinkedIn profile, see who's viewed your profile, and it's 2 or 3 people from that organization. I don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign, but it's a sign, and I find that helpful. And then the last one over here on the right, see how you compare to other applicants? When you go into LinkedIn and you start looking at job opportunities, one of the things it will start to show you is how your skills line up. So you might have a 75% match based on what LinkedIn knows about you for this particular job. There are people who can help you in terms of updating your LinkedIn profile in general. I'm not that person, but to just know and to think about that. One thing I will say is if you haven't updated your LinkedIn photo, please consider doing that.
Mhm.
Personal pet peeve is I meet somebody my age and I see their LinkedIn photo looks like their college graduation picture. And it is almost, there's this disconnect when you meet someone for the first time, say on a Zoom or in person, and they look so different than their picture on LinkedIn. And that's because they've not updated their picture. It's also make sure it's something professional. It doesn't have to be a formal professional headshot, but perhaps cropping the picture of you at the beach because you like the way you look is not the right look. So just things to think about. I can tell you I've seen a lot of that on LinkedIn. Okay, so with that in mind, I do want to shift topics. And Jody, if there's some other big questions that pop in, hold them till the end, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll probably be a lot more questions that, on your next one. So I have them down and then, I can give them to you if you're not able to address them during the presentation and you can,
Okay. And I can try to answer, well, no, maybe not. Okay,
um,
well,
yeah,
so I have this question slide, but yeah, we don't have time. We've answered a lot of questions as we've gone on. I can tell you from my experience, this section is where I'm going to get 4 times the number of questions. So I am a CPA. I used to have my own firm. It was actually in downtown Silver Spring for about 17 years. My specialty was tax. I no longer practice in tax, but I can tell you that self-employment, there is a lot of misinformation about this area, specifically around taxes. I would encourage you to get some assistance with this. If you're not sure, better to find out for sure than nobody wants to get a letter from the IRS that you didn't pay taxes properly. Self-employment tax in particular, I'll tell you right off the top, it's 15.3%. That's a lot of money to be surprised by after the fact. So this is a complicated area. I can't possibly answer all the questions for you, but I would encourage you to take the time and not follow well, somebody told me it's X, and so then you go do X. Validate that with 5 other people if you need to see, are you getting the same answer consistently? Maybe that's a cue that there's something to this answer as opposed to just going from what one person said. I can't stress this enough because in my own practice, I can't tell you how many times somebody came into me. The 2 ways that I got clients, one besides referrals, one was somebody coming in because they needed help with an IRS notice. And the IRS notice was something that had they asked a few more questions at the time, they could have avoided that situation. And then the other one is they just need help figuring out how much to pay. That's going to be a harder one, but hopefully what I'm going to share with you might help you at least mentally prepare for how much self-employment tax is compared to what you're bringing in. So on this, Jody, I'll ask you to hold the questions.
okay.
And then I will make a note of the time. We end at what, 11:45?
Yes, 11:50.
Okay, so, and if you can give me a 5 minutes left queue in case I missed the time, I would like to leave 15 minutes for questions.
Happy to do
Okay.
that.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
yes.
you. All right, so then I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, so that we can get to the questions. So self-employment. What is self-employment? You work for yourself in some capacity. What you are not is an employee. Okay. And so many of us know when we're not an employee. There are some caveats to this. If you have created a corporation, the corporation is one thing. You might be an employee of the incorporated entity that you created, but when you get through all the different levels of taxation that now apply to the corporation and to you, you are likely still paying the same level of total tax, even though you've created this organization or company to bypass it. But at the end of the day, if you work for yourself, not in an employee capacity for an organization or an entity that you do not own, consider yourself self-employed. A lot of other language is used down here. A 1099, you're a 1099 worker. Like, what does that mean? 1099 is a tax form. And it's the form you get at the end of the year to say, here's how much we paid you. It's the self-employed equivalent of a W-2. It's the easiest way to think about that. And so that's why people call people 1099s. Independent contractor, subcontractor, consultant, outside consultant, freelancer. What do all these terms mean? You're self-employed. I'm sure there are more terms, but these are the ones that I hear a lot of. They are used interchangeably. There's nothing wrong with that. The bottom line is to know that you are self-employed regardless of the language maybe an organization is using about your role. I put here some definitions to try to differentiate from a dictionary perspective what some of these terms might mean. Don't be distracted because all of these are self-employment in some way, shape, or form. So, for example, a subcontractor, especially in this area, when you have government contractors, there's something called the prime and then the sub. So if I get a contract doing consulting with, I don't know, I'm looking outside trying to think, is there going to be a company out there? Okay, here's my notebook, Travelers. Okay, so is that even around anymore? Travelers Insurance hires me to do an analysis, and they hire me, but I need some other support. So I hired 3 of you to help me with that. The contract is mine. You're working for me to support that. You are a subcontractor and you're still self-employed. So that's lingo that might show up depending on who you're talking to about the relationship you have with who's writing the checks. But don't be confused, still self-employed. Okay. Other terms, like I said, you're going to get the slides. These are definitions. I encourage you to go through and read them, especially if you keep hearing this coming up around you. Jody, you talked about ChatGPT. I didn't mention that before, but let me tell you, ChatGPT and other tools like that, they can be very helpful. They can also be wrong. So you can go to ChatGPT. I should pull up a screen share and just show you very quickly, but I won't. You can go to ChatGPT. And are you going to do a session on using something like AI?
Yes, we will.
Okay, good. Because
Yes.
Jody, thank you. Because that's really important. The thing to know about it is you can talk to it like a person. So if you want to know tell me a little bit more about the gig economy and how that might affect me because I do graphic design. So if that's what you want to know, you go to ChatGPT and you type in, tell me what I need to know about the gig economy because I do, right? You can literally talk to it like that. So hopefully that'll take away some of the intimidation factor. It's a different way to get definitions. So you're self-employed. Gross income is the total amount you're taking in, top end before you think about expenses, deductions, etc. So if you send an invoice to a client for $500 and they give you $500, your gross income is $500. If in the course of that work, you incurred $75 of expenses and the client paid for those $75 and ended up just writing you a check for the difference, $425, your gross income is the $500 that you were paid. The $75 number, that's an expense. So always think about what's the high number? What is the amount they're paying you in terms of value? What did you ask them to pay you for your services? That's your income. It doesn't matter how you get paid, cash, Venmo, Zelle, PayPal. It doesn't matter. If you are self-employed, one of the things you might want to make sure you're set up on is PayPal, Zelle, and Venmo, because a lot of organizations use that today. And so it doesn't matter the type of income, as I said, in any of those categories, and it doesn't matter how you get paid. If someone's giving you money for work, it's income. This is also important to know that if you drive for Uber, which I know a lot of people do, or if you use something like Fiverr, TaskRabbit, Upwork, these are places that independent contractors or consultants can go to and say, hey, I am a graphic designer and I can design things for you. So you can go create an account on one of these platform services, and people like me go to those services and say, hey, I'm trying to find a graphic designer. And then I might find you and hire you. Regardless of whether your check comes through a platform service or paid directly to you, that's still the same source of income. All of that's gross income. What are expenses? Technically, nothing. The only way for it to be a business expense is if it meets those two criteria. It has to be ordinary, so it's the kind of thing you'd expect for the work that you do, and necessary. You needed to spend that money in order to make income. So, in theory, nothing is deductible unless it meets those two categories. Now, the reality is a lot of things meet those two categories. And so this is a technical rule to know about, though, because sometimes people get stuck here because it's a needed expense in your mind, but the IRS says you didn't really need that, not to do the type of work you do. So I don't want to split hairs. I think just to think about this in the back of your mind, because is it a normal type of expense for your industry? Because if it's a normal expense for your industry, you're going to be fine. It's when you are starting to pay for things that are choices that you're going to make because you want to make it a business expense, but it might not necessarily be one. Come back and answer these questions in your mind to see, would an IRS person walking in objectively see this expense, see what you do for a living, and say, oh, no, that makes sense. So some examples, these are the kinds of things that you see here. I need to go take a continuing education course, business expense. As a CPA, I have to pay annually or every other year for my license, business expense. In order to, I use LinkedIn for business purposes. LinkedIn Premium I pay for, business expense. So whatever it is, even ChatGPT subscription, if I'm using ChatGPT, it's $20 a month to have a subscription where you get access to some of the higher, the different levels of AI that they offer. And I'm using it in my work, business expense. Some expense categories have limitations. So meals, for example, if you and I meet for coffee at Starbucks and we do some friendly chit chat, hey, how's it going? It's nice to meet you. And then we dig into it and we start talking about, so tell me a little bit about your background. What type of work are you looking for? Hey, do you know anybody I know? Like, you're just talking about stuff, even though it's general, but it's business related. You and I met and had paid for things we could eat, paid for things we could drink. That is meals and entertainment. Classic example. You only get to take half of that, 50%. And the thinking there is, well, half of it was, you're a human, you need food. So at some level, we're not going to let you deduct the personal part. But then on some level, it was also business related. And so, we'll give you half. So that's where that comes in. Taxes vary by type. Some taxes, not deductible. Other taxes, absolutely. When it comes to using your car, when it comes to using your house, very complex calculations. There are forms and instructions for that, but in that case, I would certainly recommend working with somebody who knows. They might not be somebody who's going to prepare your entire tax return, if that's the case, but at least somebody can help you understand those rules and how they apply to you. And so that's why I have this category slide here, because if you see some of these things, a major purchase, think of that as something that a single thing that costs you more than $1,000. That's not a hard and fast number, but it's something to give you an idea. So a computer, a cell phone. These are things that they're big expenses, and they're things that are going to last you over time. So things to think about. Okay, now let's talk about the fun stuff, your taxes. When you're self-employed, there are two different levels of tax that you pay. So forget about self-employment for a moment, and let's just all think about the annual fun we have preparing our personal tax return, right? What are some of the things that go on a normal tax return? Well, our W-2 income, interest, dividends, capital gain, unemployment income. Well, those are the big ones that I think most people recognize. Those are the types of things that we normally sort of go find all those numbers, add them up, and they go on our tax return. And for most of us, that's a 1040 or a 1040 version. From there, we calculate all of our income, and then we get deductions, standard deduction. Maybe I qualify for a healthcare type tax credit or whatever. And from all of that, we calculate our tax, our income tax. And then we pay it. And we pay it in a number of different ways. For most of us, though, especially if you're earning income from an employer, they have withholding. And we're kind of familiar with that because our gross pay might be $1,000, but our take-home pay is $700. What happened to the $300? Your employer took some of that money out and sent it to the IRS on your behalf, to the state of Maryland, where I live, on my behalf, and some other stuff. That feels very familiar. We know that the money that the IRS got from our employer over the year is already treated as a payment. So when we calculate our income tax, and then we subtract out the money they already got, most of us hope for a refund, and then we don't know more. So the left side of the screen, income tax, very familiar. But there's another line that we need to include. So we have wages, interest, dividends, capital gain, unemployment, and then we're going to insert a new line here, self-employment. So our self-employment net profit is another source of income subject to income tax. So for fun, let's say from all the other sources I made $50,000, and then through my self-employment, I spent, well, now I got to do spontaneous math, and I might be a CPA, but we don't do arithmetic. So we earned, okay, I can't hurt myself. Let's say between my income minus my expenses for business, I came up with a net of 50. Okay, so $50,000 from self-employment net after expenses, $50,000 from all the other types of income, total $100,000 minus our standard deduction, any other special credits and things that we pay, minus our withholding. That's what we would either get back as a refund or owe. And you hope it stops there. So that self-employment income goes into that bucket. But then there's the other side of the screen, self-employment tax. That $50,000 self-employment net profit, it's subject to a separate tax. That separate tax is called the self-employment tax. So wait, I have income, deductions, income tax? Yes. We're going to add in a new line here, self-employment tax. It is a separate tax. I add those two together. Now I have my real total tax that determines how much I have to pay. So what is the self-employment tax? Well, many of us are familiar with Social Security and Medicare, often called FICA, or just referred to as Social Security and Medicare. And if you've ever gotten a pay stub and you go back, you're going to see some withholding. So here's an example of a pay stub. this is John. John got paid $2,000 and some withholding came out of his paycheck. Federal, I don't see a state tax here. FICA, FICA, SS. So that's Social Security and Medicare. Now, you'll notice that when you add up the two of these and it gets to $153, but the gross wages are $2,000, let me go back. That is not 15%. So wait, what? Well, the actual total FICA on $2,000 is $306. So wait, how does this work? Well, FICA, which is I'm going to use as my abbreviation for Social Security and Medicare, FICA is actually calculated in total and split 50-50. So I pay $153 as John, and John's company pays $153. So Social Security Administration gets $306, but I only sent in $153. The thing about FICA is that everybody earning income, all of us pay that 15.3% of Social Security, which is I think people generally call it Social Security, even though we know it's Social Security and Medicare, FICA. Everybody pays 15.3% FICA. The difference is that when you're self-employed, there's nobody to pay the other half. You're the employee. John is employed, self-employed. So John's paying 153 as the employee. And then John's paying 153 as the employer because he's self-employed. It doesn't make sense in some ways, and then in other ways, it makes total sense. So what happens now is John earned $2,000 from a client. John has to then put that down on that schedule, that separate schedule, the self-employment tax schedule, calculate the tax, $306, and pays that tax when he files his tax return. That's that added tax that I was talking about that gets put on your tax return. The combination of those two is what we call the self-employment tax. So self-employment tax is 15.3% of your net business profit. Now, remember, in my other example, it's probably not the best example because I had 50,000 of all the other types of income and then 50,000 of self-employment income, if you remember that. On that $50,000, I have to pay this tax. Even though on $100,000, when I put everything together, I had to pay income tax. So I have to pay income tax based on my tax brackets, and I have to pay self-employment tax based solely on my self-employment net profit. Hopefully, this makes sense. Let me show you the forms. So when you are filing your tax return, when you are self-employed, the way you calculate that net profit that you're going to determine is what you pay self-employment tax on. Schedule C is what you're going to use there. So that's the one that you see here in the background. When you calculate your self-employment tax, you're going to use this one here in the middle, Schedule SE. And what Schedule SE does is it asks you pretty simple questions. Number one, what was your net employment? What is your net profit from self-employment? And then if you follow the rules down, then it's going to ask you to calculate what is shockingly 15.3% of that. That's it. And then it's going to tell you to put that number on your tax return, on your main form. Form 1040ES, this little teeny voucher here, that's the payment, the voucher that you use to prepay your self-employment tax. I'll show you that form toward the end, the math on that. But these are the basic forms that you're going to use. There's some other forms depending on other special deductions. For example, there's a special form if you made a major purchase. There's a special form if you are using your home for business purposes. So there's some other forms that might come in on your personal return, but these are the main ones. And these are for anybody who is self-employed and not one of those other special types of entities. If you created a corporation, if you formed something and called it an LLC or an S corporation, another conversation. But this is, if you're not one of those, this is the form that you use. So I'm going to break this form down into its 3 sections so that you at least have an understanding when you look at the form of what the heck it means. So the top section, well, the first section here, you can't really see it, but there's part 1 and part 2. That first section is all of your income, all sources, boiled down to a single number. So I got 500 from this person, 2,000 from that person, 10,000 here, 4,000 here, 100 here. I did not keep track of those numbers. I'm going to say it all equals $15,000. I'm doing all of that math on the side to get to the 15. That's the one that gets income. In this middle section, there is all these little lines for you to put in expenses. There's another space on the next page that says, if it ain't one of these, you can create a list and you start putting all your other. For example, continuing education isn't one on this list, so I just type it on the next page as an other, and spell it out. Software subscriptions, not on this list. Licenses and fees, not necessarily. I don't think it's on this list. And then the bottom is how you calculate your net profit. So this form essentially is the equivalent of your tax profit and loss, with a couple of exceptions. So here I'm zooming in on the top section. Here, business name. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. You don't need one. You can be, I could be Jina Etienne, doing business as Etienne Consulting. I'm not an LLC. I'm not a corporation. I'm not any of those things. So I could put that name here, the business name. There's no consequence to this. It's just providing all of the information the IRS is asking for. This other one here, employer ID number. A lot of people can go to the IRS and ask for it, and I recommend you do this. You go online and you apply for a business ID number, which is called an employer identification number. Don't be confused by the word employer. I wish it just said business ID number. It doesn't create another level of tax. What it does is I think the reason you get it is it shields you from having to share your actual Social Security number. So if you apply for a federal tax ID number, you can think of your self-employed business as having its own number. So oftentimes people will ask you, remember when we had a job and it asked us for our W-4 and we put in our name and our tax ID, our Social Security number, and then said how much we want withheld? Well, companies, when you're an independent contractor or self-employed, will ask you to send them their form that says what's your company name and what's your company ID. And if you don't have this field, employer ID number, you have to give your social. So I recommend as a best practice to get a federal ID number for the company so that you can provide that information to anybody who asks and you never have to give your Social Security number. It doesn't mean you're an employer. It's just, think of it as the business equivalent of a Social Security number. And then this line here, gross income, that's the line where you add up everything, top line of everything, total that you billed, if you will, and collected from your clients. That goes here. There's no place you need a detailed schedule, by the way, to break it down. So you're going to want to keep that schedule as part of your files in case you get audited. This next section that I talked about, section 2 for expenses, this entire section here is the breakdown. So you can see, like on line 8, and I don't know if you can really see this, but there's advertising. On line 15, insurance other than health. Health insurance, special rules on that. Over here, see 24B, deductible meals. I spent $25, it's $24 at Starbucks. I'm only going to put $12 here because remember, 50%, only get half. So there are all of those expenses that I listed on the other screen, but you notice many of them are not here. And so that's why you have an opportunity on another schedule to spell out what they are. If you're paying for postage and you're paying for paper for the printer and ink for your pens, like these are just generic office, the cost of having an office, you can just lump everything here under office expenses up on line 18. This isn't intended to be a course on how to fill out your tax forms, but I want you to see where the IRS looks to get your income and your expenses, which then determines your net profit, which is down here at the bottom. So those are the three sections of your form. I did not pull up the Schedule SE where you calculate your self-employment tax. Excuse me, that's a pretty straightforward form. The most important thing for you to be aware of is this number. This is the number that is subject to self-employment tax. So this is the number you need to know so that you can plan accordingly. Now, if you hear nothing else from me today, what I want you to think about, and a best practice where people get caught and get stuck. If you add up your income tax, let's say it's 12% for fun's sake. Your effective tax rate. And maybe that's not it, but I'm just trying to do simple math. And you add the 15% self-employment tax. It's 15 plus 12, 15, 27? 27% off the top of your self-employment earnings, you're going to be paying tax on. If you hear nothing else from me, if you are self-employed, every time you get a check of any kind, I want you to take 27%, hell, let's say 30%, set it aside and live off the 70. Because if you don't, this is where people get trapped and surprised. The IRS is going to come back later and say, hold on, you didn't pay your self-employment tax. Send me that now. I spent that money. I don't have 15.3% after the fact. So I'm going to say it again. If you hear nothing else from me today, when you get paid self-employment earnings, I want you to set aside 30% or 25%, some number so that you have money available to you to pay the tax. Yes, I know you're going to have business expenses. You're not going to pay tax on that full amount. But I like to be conservative here. I would rather get a refund than owe. So I would rather set aside money and then find out happily I don't need to use all of it than the other way around. Should I say it again if you hear nothing else? Okay, I said it enough times. Okay, so how do you pay these taxes? Well, this gets a little tricky because you have to predict the future. I say this tongue in cheek, but these are the rules that the IRS says. The IRS says that you have to estimate what you're going to owe. So let's say on $100,000 minus my standard deduction, I'm going to make, dear God, I cannot do spontaneous math. So I'm making up a number that is not at all relevant to tax rates. Let's say my tax is $15,000. What the IRS is going to say, all right, hold on, 15,000 times 0.9, that's 13,500 in taxes. That's 90% of what you're going to owe. And that's what the IRS is expecting you to have paid in. And if you pay in less than that, they're going to charge you interest because in their mind, they've essentially loaned you the money and you got to use money that they didn't get to use. They're charging you interest on it. Weird logic, but true. Oh, and then there's a penalty for not paying in what you're supposed to pay in. So you're going to get charged a penalty plus interest on the shortfall that you didn't pay. If you paid in at least 90%, you can pay the 10% difference when you file, and no harm, no foul. How the hell are you supposed to know 90% of the future? And so that's where the safe harbor rule comes in. Third bullet underneath that section. Safe harbor rule to avoid penalty is to pay 100% of what you owed last year. So if I look at last year's tax return, and last year's tax return I owed, say, $16,500. Instead of trying to guess what I'm going to owe this year, I'm just going to send in 16.5 and get a refund, and at least I won't get charged a penalty. That's the safe harbor rule. There are reasons to do it. There are reasons not to do it. No time to go into that here. Just know that you don't have to predict the future. What you will have to do, though, is whatever the amount is, you're going to have to send it in to the government in 4 installments. So next year, all right, I'm changing the number so I can do math. Next year, I'm going to owe $8,000. I'm predicting. So I'm going to send in 4 $2,000 payments, one on April 15, one on June 15, one on September 15, and one on January the following year. So that way, when I file a couple months later in April, I've already sent in $8,000. If I end up owing $8,500, I cut a check for the difference. If I end up owing $7,500, I get a refund. But I have to send those in advance. The same rules apply in the state of Maryland. The same rules apply in Virginia. If you live in Virginia, you have different due dates, slightly different by like 15 days in a couple of months. I think that's correct. Could be different in any other state. Most of the time, they follow these dates because the states want to make it easy. When you pay the IRS, you pay me as well. Where do you make those payments? On the IRS website, you can go directly there. You'll see this says irs.gov/payments. When you get there, ACH payment, credit card payment, like there are lots of different ways. They'll take your money however you want to send it to them. They give you options. State of Maryland has a website. It is difficult to find, I will tell you. So if you have to make estimated tax payments, download the handout, a copy of my slides. You have the link right here. It should work that if you open the file, the Adobe file on your screen, page down to this page in the handout, in theory, you can literally click on the link on that PDF and it will open it. But if it doesn't, I spelled it out here for you. Maryland also allows you to go in and pay it in a number of different forms. Even better, in many states, what you can do is you can schedule all your payments. I mean, if I have to pay $4,000, $2,000 4 times, I don't personally want to forget. So I'm going to schedule all of my payments in advance, but then I have to remember to make a note so the cash is in my account. So that is the general rule for making payments. Okay, that was a lot. I know that was a lot and I went through it quickly, but I wanted to cover all of this so that there was more than enough time for questions. I can see I'm way ahead. So let's go to questions. And I don't know who's been tracking that.
I have.
All right, fire away.
All right. Are you ready? Okay.
Of course.
Everybody first, I want everybody just to stretch for a second. All right. We've been sitting for a moment. Let's stretch. Really seriously stretch. Okay. And take a couple deep breaths. Jina, this has been amazingly helpful.
Well, wait. Hold on, Ann. Hold on. You said take a couple deep breaths. So people breathe in there. Ready?
Yes.
We're going to breathe in. Hold it a little bit. Slow breath out.
There you go.
Do that 2 more times. In. Hold. Blow out. All right. Last time. In. Hold. And this time when you blow out, make it loud. Like, okay.
You're good. All right.
As we say we'll do it, but we don't.
This is true. And this is all good stuff and very important.
Okay,
so
Ann.
I am going to now, I'm going to put a little marker so I know where I left off. So the questions I've put into Word for you, and here we go. All right. Do you need to pay Social Security if you are over 65 years of age?
Yes.
Can you explain the significance of the beneficial ownership information report? I have an LLC I just formed a couple weeks ago and found out about that.
Yes, that's a new report. And what the government wants to know is, are you foreign or not? So they want to know who's the real owner behind your business.
Okay.
That's all it is. It's a simple form. You can go to the government website and literally it's like 3 questions or 4 questions. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay. And to clarify, a person does not need to legally have a business to take the relevant business expenses, right?
Correct. what you need to have is spend money in order to earn money. Usually that's the order. So in order to promote myself on LinkedIn, I choose to subscribe to LinkedIn Premium. I'm writing a check and I have not earned a dime. But what's my motivation? Earning money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you spent the money because you need to earn the income, it is an expense. Let me go back up here on, did I put it? Here. Deductions are expenses directly related to your income. So if you spend money because you are self-employed, any category, you spend money to earn that income, it is a deduction because it is directly related. The timing of it doesn't matter. You can write the check in January, earn the income in June. If it was all in the same calendar year, because that's the way we file our taxes, all of the income that year, and then all of the expenses that year. Make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
And is it wise to form an entity like an LLC for asset protection?
I get this question a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Asset protection is a question that comes up because let's say I'm a painter and I'm going into people's houses and I'm like actually putting my hands on the walls to paint. And when I go into somebody's house, I set up a ladder because let's say they have tall ceilings, high ceilings, and I stumble, the ladder falls over. I'm fine, but then the ladder shatters their coffee table. And it turns out it's a $200,000 coffee table. Why would it be that? Maybe it's a family heirloom.
Yep.
And they're going to sue me to pay for that. So I am now personally liable for that. Ah, but what if I formed an LLC and I can protect myself from liability? I'm here to tell you, no, you cannot. So don't do it if that's what you're trying to do. If you want to protect yourself from liability, get professional liability insurance. Umbrella protection. That is the only thing that's going to protect you. And here's why. If you personally were involved in knocking over something and breaking that heirloom, you are personally liable. Whether or not you have an LLC, you, the human, did the thing, the human who did the thing can be held liable. That is a common misconception that an LLC will protect you from limited liability. It does in very limited situations, rarely for somebody who is self-employed at the level that we're talking about.
Okay, that's wow. Okay, that's good to know. The next question is, let me go back to that. There are states and county taxes in Maryland. What is the total maximum a business can pay?
Oh, there's no maximum. The state will take as much money as they can. So I think that's maybe the wrong way to phrase that question. I think what we really want to know is, what are all the taxes? What's my total tax burden, if you will?
Yeah.
So we know we have on just self-employment earnings, we have income tax, we have self-employment tax. In the state of Maryland, there's a state tax and a county tax. Those are both paid on the state level. On the state form, they have the calculations for both. You might have to pay a license fee. You might have to pay, I'm trying to think of some other taxes that you might have to pay, but there may be business taxes that your business is subject to because of the nature of the work that you do. And that's considered a tax. All the taxes are calculated at the level of whoever's assessing it. So there's no single place to go that I can tell you what the total tax liability is. This is where you have to know. There is one extra thing in the state of Maryland, by the way. It's called the personal property tax. Sole proprietors are subject to it just like corporations, partnerships, LLCs. You have to file a return every year with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Again, it's the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. And there are exceptions so that you file it and say, I don't apply, so don't send me the tax. But if it does, it's $300 a year. So just know that that's out there.
Okay. Wow. Do you have to estimate taxes on new startups?
Yes.
Okay.
That's where things get difficult. So let me give you a real example. I had a client that came in, and last year, let's say they made $100,000, they paid tax on it. But this year, they decided to quit their job and go solo. And they only earned about 20 because, they didn't get rolling until the fall. So this year, let's say fast forward, and we realize they're only going to owe like $2,000, and last year they owed 20. You mean to tell me I can either project that I'm going to owe 2,000 and pay 90% of that,
Mm.
or just to make sure I don't get stuck with the penalty, pay 100% of last year, which is ridiculous? The answer is yes, those same rules apply. And so that's one of the reasons why sometimes paying 100% of what you owed last year is just impractical because you didn't earn that much. It does not alleviate you from the responsibility. So this is where you're going to have to start to ballpark and estimate what that's going to be and pay that in installments. If you start your business in June, you still have to pay the September payment and the January payment, and it still has to equal 90%. So there's no way around the rule. The bigger trick here is how are you going to ballpark what you owe? Better to pay something than nothing. And if you aren't sure, I gave you some simple numbers. 15% of your profit, your net income. I don't know, throw in another 10% for your income tax. That might get you close, and you don't need to hire somebody expensive, but that is a total shot in the dark. There are websites you can go to help you calculate what you think your tax is going to be. I don't have anyone to recommend in particular, but there are tools you can use.
Okay. And is there an amount that you don't have to pay anything if you make less than?
Nope.
Mm.
The IRS says if you go back and do the fun thing back in the day when I did this for a living, and I actually read the Internal Revenue Code, please don't hold that against me. There is a code section that says all income is taxable unless we say otherwise. And then the rest of the code gives you all the exceptions. And then the code section that I told you about expenses, it says nothing is deductible unless it's ordinary and necessary. And then it carves out a bunch of explanations as to what that means.
Wow.
And the only way we get as individuals is we get that standard deduction, which is the amount all of us get to take off of our tax return that's not subject to tax. That is a universal deduction that all of us get. You can itemize if you can do better, but there's nothing special you get for being self-employed. This is why you have to pay close attention to the money that you're spending and capture as many of those deductions, legitimate deductions, as you can.
Okay.
Oh, can I say one more thing about that?
Yes.
I
Yes.
said legitimate deductions, and what a lot of people do is they like to get, I don't want to say aggressive, but they try to make as many things business deductible as possible. There's nothing wrong with that. You can actually have enough expenses where you pay very little or no self-employment tax because your net profit is, very low. Which is fine, fair, legitimate if that's what's happening. The danger, though, and just to be aware, is that if you show a loss for multiple years, it might flag you where the IRS says, well, hey, what's going on here? Because who can operate at a loss for this long?
Mm.
So you might open yourself up to audit. I will tell you from experience, you can win that audit if you have your documentation because you legitimately deducted these expenses and you had a loss. Where some people get in trouble, though, is they get a little creative about their expenses and the IRS says, nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. And when they recalculate it, you actually owe some tax. So
Okay.
something to be mindful of.
Okay. And are we paying the estimate for both income and self-employment tax or just self-employment tax?
You are estimating your total tax liability
Yep.
and paying that in.
Okay.
If you think, so remember the tax formula I said, all of your income, add it all up, wages, interest, dividends, self-employment profits, minus your standard deduction or any other special things that go on your tax return, total tax. That is the amount you have to pay in. Oh, wait, self-employment tax. Now we get to total tax. That's what you have to pay 90% of.
Okay.
So
And
it will in fact be all the tax you're going to owe on your net profit.
okay. Is it possible that your Social Security earnings statement will not reflect your earnings because you used an E&I instead of an SS number?
No. On the Schedule C, that's why it asks you for that number. On the Schedule C, if you look here just above the top, it asks you for your name, Jina Etienne. It asks me for my Social Security number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What business am I in? I'm a consultant. That's all I'm going to put. What's my business name? Etienne Consulting. What's my federal tax ID number? 987654321. And so what the IRS has done is it says, oh, this EIN goes with that person, which by the way, it already knew because when you applied for the EIN number, you had to tell it who you were.
Right.
So it doesn't create any additional taxes. It's just a number that's used to associate with the company rather than you personally.
So, Jana, then an EIN instead of a Social Security number does not affect your Social Security earnings system negatively. Is that correct?
So Social Security earnings, when the Social Security looks to see how much you can get and looks at your income limitations for a number of different reasons, it's looking at all of your income, all sources. What it's not doing is saying, looking at your self-employment income separately than it's looking at all of your other income. The reason self-employment income as a category is so complicated is because, one, how do you calculate it? Income. You have to think about what is income, what is an expense, what is my net profit. You have to know what the self-employment tax is. There will also still be income tax. You have to know all of this if you're self-employed. All that being said, at the end of the day, we have a tax return that is all this stuff on it, and it's going to have total income, total tax, total payments, refund balance. And what Social Security Administration is looking at all our income. It does not care where you got the income from. So I think that's important because a lot of people get confused with self-employment tax, but I want you to think of the self-employment income, expenses, profit, and taxes as a thing associated with the business. All of that, it gets added back to the rest of your personal tax return as income and the expense piece, the tax pieces. Make sense?
Great. So using an E&I instead of a Social Security number does not affect your Social Security earnings system statement
No,
negatively.
because that's all driven off of your social.
Fabulous. And then appreciate the breakdown of information. If a person is a DoorDash deliverer, independent contractor, and they create a business ID, if there is a lawsuit, will their personal assets be safe?
So personal assets are subject to you. If you get sued by somebody and you lose, you got to make a payment. And if you can't pay it out of current cash, you're going to have to sell off your stuff in order to make that payment. So anytime you're found personally liable for anything, regardless of why, your personal assets are at risk for that very reason. Could you be found liable if you form an LLC? Yes. Could you be found liable if you're an Uber driver? Yes. Could you be found liable if you are anybody providing any type of professional service? Yes. So I caution you from thinking there's any way to protect your personal assets if you are a small business. There are very few ways to actually do that. There are a few. Talk to an attorney to learn a little bit more about what it is in your industry and for your business type.
Okay. If I'm over 65, what is the tax difference between unemployed and retired? That kind of
Those are
varies.
just descriptors.
Yeah.
If you're unemployed, that means if you meet the requirements, you can collect unemployment for a period of time through the Maryland system or the state system. If you're retired, it's just a way of saying to people, I'm not working anymore. It's like saying, I'm a consultant, and somebody says, I'm retired. That statement has nothing to do with my tax return.
Right. Okay, let's see. I plan to deduct the cost of motivational recordings I bought, like Tony Robinson. He also offers coaching to help business grow. Can we deduct those as a business expense?
If you are doing it for professional development purposes and you are doing it while you are in business, I would.
Okay.
That is not a legal, formal, technical answer. I'm just telling you, if it were me, I would do it.
Yeah.
I know what's motivating me to do it, and that is all the rules are requiring.
And we have this is great info for self-employment, better to know in advance and have a plan. Agree.
Yeah.
How long do you have to be self-employed to start filing taxes?
5 minutes.
Ah, okay. Are state taxes due quarterly as well?
Yes.
Okay, please, I don't know if you can do this. Please review the Social Security income legalities.
Say that again. Social Security income legalities?
Yes.
Yeah, that's way beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah. Um, would they talk to a Social Security advisor or lawyer? Do you know?
It depends on what you're looking for, but I would say you might want to talk to an attorney.
Yeah.
Because when you talk to an accountant, the accountant can make recommendations and analysis based on what we know the situation to be. But if you're not sure of what the situation is, and there's some legal context to it, talk to an attorney before you talk to the accountant. And I would tell you, accountants, especially CPAs, think very highly of their skills. I'm throwing some shade out there on my colleagues because unfortunately, there is as much incompetence in the CPA field as there is in any other field. But we tend to trust somebody because they have the CPA credential. Vet them and know that as a CPA, when I studied for the exam, I want to say like 20% of the test was business law. So to some degree, you have some familiarity with law. I have a master's in tax. Don't hold that against me either. It means I understand tax law. It does not make me an attorney. So get legal advice if you are concerned about entity type, protection of assets, something that might have to do with, especially as we get older, protecting our assets from like, as we, get older and you run the risk of having to burn through all of your assets, say, before you can qualify for Medicare. Those are whole very important conversations to have. And then you bring the conclusion to your accountant to help you figure out the tax consequences of that.
Oh, okay, that's good. Then we have a question of, to clarify, if all your work-based income is from self-employment, are you paying both personal income taxes on the amount and self-employment tax on the same amount? Or is the personal income tax only for things outside what you earn from self-employment, such as withdrawals from IRAs, dividends, or investments?
All right, I am going to show you directly the answer to your question and how you can figure out this answer if you have a question for yourself. So this is the form 1040. This is last year's. Let me zoom in. And you are seeing my screen share, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying before, oops, I went too far. If you look on income here, where are self-employment earnings? Why can't I find it? Oh, because it's on a separate schedule. That's why. So your self-employment earnings go here to get your total income. There's another schedule, I want to say schedule 1, where you report it and then it carries over to the front page. But trust me, it goes here. You add your deductions, blah, blah, blah. And over here, you get your total tax, right? Well, up here on line 16, you see tax. Then here you see other taxes, including self-employment tax. So you add income tax, line 16, self-employment tax, line 23, total tax, line 24. If you're self-employed, you're focusing on line 24. And that's the number you pay tax on, which means it's all of your taxes. I
Okay.
think that was the question I was asked, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, do you have to explicitly name your business on a liability insurance policy, or does your personal liability insurance cover claims during the course of your business dealings?
That depends entirely. There are several different types of business insurance for you to get. Each insurance type protects against different types of risks. So you might need multiple forms of insurance. Please don't ask your accountant. Please don't ask your attorney. Ask your insurance agent.
Mhm.
You might want to talk to your attorney to determine what classes of things do you need to protect for whatever it is you're trying to do. Let's say you're trying to manage your assets to protect you from having to lose many of them before you can qualify for Medicare. Those are some legal strategies, perhaps. Insurance agents can tell you how to protect the things that you've now identified need to be protected. That's why this stuff is so complicated. There are specialists in each of these areas. So reach out to those specialists for different types of questions.
Okay, and we just have about another minute left here. Can one deduct a percentage of one's home owner's insurance on Schedule C?
So anything that's related to your home, there are special rules for home office. Home office expenses essentially boil down to, I want to take a percentage of everything I pay because of my house and I'm working in my house. So there's a formula for that. It's a form 8829, I believe, and it will calculate all of that for you. So mortgage
Okay.
interest, real estate taxes, properties, insurance, utilities, like all of the things that you pay, rent if you're renting. And then you have to go through a formula to figure out what percentage of that do you get because you're doing business in your house. It's more complicated.
Is there an amount that you don't have, I think you answered this, that you don't have to pay anything if you make less than?
The only thing that we can avoid, you're not gonna avoid the self-employment tax no matter what. What you will think about is income taxes. If you make less than the standard deduction, so if the standard deduction is 29,000 and you make 28, 28 minus 29 is negative. No income tax. But if the $28,000 is from self-employment earnings, you still owe the self-employment tax. Remember, they're two different taxes.
Okay, and real quick, because then we're gonna have to close up this section. And thank you so much for being here today this morning. It's been so informative. So if you pay about 30% on all your income and then 15.3% of your self-employment, then aren't you paying 45% of your self-employed?
Okay, yes, you are paying 15% self-employment in my formula. Your income, regular income tax, let's say that's 10%. Your self-employment tax is 15%. I added both of those together to get to the total tax. In that case, what is it? 12 and 15 is 27. And then I rounded it up for good measure to 30 to be conservative. So that number that I gave you was both income tax and self-employment tax. Because if you don't plan for both on your self-employment income, you will get a rude surprise when you file your tax return because you haven't anticipated both sides of the tax on that part of your income.
All right. Just a quick yes or no. Can you deduct the cost of a professional liability insurance? I get SSDI and it was taxed. And it may be that you can't answer that question.
Professional liability insurance is deductible.
Okay. All right.
I don't know what that has to do with SSDI. So to be fair, professional liability insurance is deductible.
All right. Everyone, I am going to put Jina's information in chat again. Her PowerPoint presentation has also been in chat, but it's will be sent to everybody either tomorrow night or Thursday, and it's also going to be posted on the Expo's website. This recording in a few weeks will also go up online, and when it does, I'll send you the link. Jina, thank you so much for being here today. It was a pleasure seeing you, and you are a wealth of information. And thank you for participating today in the expo. We greatly appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All right,
Thank
you be
Jina.
well.
Great job. Thank